This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Welcome to the OAR podcast, the Otago Institute podcast, in-depth conversations with experts from the worlds of arts, sciences and Mataranga Māori. Brought to you by the Otago Institute, the Otago branch of the Royal Society for Arts and Sciences.
Kia ora, I'm Trudi.
And I'm Dr. Barb. And today we're in conversation with Associate Professor Nic Rawlence about ancient DNA and an extinct duck.
Sounds like a Chinese food item you could order. Only number 27, the extinct duck, please.
Hey, welcome to the studio, Nic.
Thanks for having me on. And
Nic holds a Bachelor of Biomedical Sciences from Vic Uni. That's a strange sort of a degree, isn't it, Nic?
Yeah, it is. I was always going to come down here to Otago and do archaeology. I'd come down with my parents and actually talk to all the archaeology professors who'd been up in Nelson where I lived, excavating archaeological sites, and CSI Las Vegas, the original, came out and said, I want to go do forensics. It'll be really cool.
Yeah.
I think that CSI actually caused a lot of people to change their degrees, I think.
Well, I want to be a forensic accountant, but you never see a CSI program about that.
No.
Yeah, but sometimes there are forensic accountants on other programs.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Sorry, we digress there. So, and then from there, an MSc in Conservation and Genetics on kakariki, again at the Vic Uni. So that's quite a change there, no?
Yeah, so I went into biomedical science and it gave me all the genetics background, but I had one field trip in undergrad and that was to the zoo. And I went, this is too much like an office job, which I didn't want.
Right.
So jumped ship and did evolution of kakariki and building the whakapapa and looking at the impacts of humans and climate change, and got to go to the subantarctic islands of New Zealand. And
So is that the current distribution of the kakariki now? Where are they?
So they're all around the New Zealand region. So they, if we think of the recently extinct, as far south as Macquarie Island, as far north as the Kermadex, as far west as Norfolk Island and Lord Howe. Lord Howe's recently extinct. And then as far east as the Chathams, and then potentially way out into the Pacific around Tahiti and Tuamotu Archipelago. So we've got a project with the British Museum of Natural History to try and work out the whakapapa once and for all.
Wow, so that's actually a really wide distribution, but still extant, right? Still here.
Still extant for most of it. It's a bit contracted, but you still get kakariki around New Zealand. You've got orange-fronted parakeet that have got the strongholds in Arthur's Pass and parts of North Canterbury that have now been translocated to Fiordland and the Marlborough Sounds, and you get yellow-crowned parakeets in rare spots on the mainland, and same with red crowns.
And so what's just diverging completely from the duck here just for a second while I just concentrate on the beautiful parrots. I was just thinking, what's the main thing driving them extinct? Because that's quite a contraction over, what is that, quite a relative, is that post-European?
Post-European arrival, they're hole nesters, and so they're really prone to habitat destruction.
Right, so that's whole like they're in a tree,
they're
a hole in a tree rather than partial and whole.
Yeah. Holes in trees, holes in banks. We were working on Mana Island. We were putting up nest boxes all around the island, and I can guarantee that none of the kakariki were using the nest boxes. They were all nesting in holes of macrocarpa trees or in old kingfisher burrows or in banks, and so they're really prone to predation from rats and stoats and that as well.
So they've just evolved a type of nesting behaviour that was perfectly good and obviously served them really well because they spread across everywhere that they could basically get to until they had this addition of this European predator.
Yeah, and they speciated, or they diversified really rapidly, and that's what we're trying to work out of how quick was that diversification, how many species, when did they diverge, because one of the things is they haven't evolved enough barriers to reproduction, so you get hybridization between different species. So we're trying to work out, is that or an artifact of post-human impact, or is this a common thing this species did even prior to humans? So if you think of like hybridization, so if you think of like a a donkey and a mule, for example, is if you look in the fossil record, you think that should be really rare. And with paleogenomics, so sequencing complete ancient genomes, the complete genetic blueprint of an individual back through time, hybridization is everywhere. We see it throughout horses, bears, humans, cattle. So you've gone from, if you think of those nice evolutionary trees that Darwin drew.
Yeah, it's really scribbly little bushes where everything kind of goes into divaricating shrubs,
yes,
aren't they?
Exactly.
It's all New Zealand, they're divaricating shrubs. So that was the problem with Darwin. He didn't have enough experience of New Zealand.
No, he didn't. And he didn't like New Zealand. He got to Russell and found it really boring and then went.
That's not what I heard about Russell in those days. 20 pubs and full of whalers or something.
It's called Our Whole of the Pacific.
Yeah.
So
he must have been a real party guy then. I reckon we might have to rewrite that.
He was a reverend, right? So probably it wasn't as scene, the party scene. I don't know. Just totally hypothetical here. Hey, so we've got the Bachelor of Biomedical Science, MSc in Conservation Genetics, and then a PhD in Ancient DNA from the University of Adelaide. And then, of course, back here to New Zealand to the University of Otago, based in the Zoology Department, University of Otago, and the Paleogenetics Lab. And you've been here for over a decade now.
Yeah, making a nice hole in the carpet in my office.
Have you had the same office the whole time? No, surely not.
No, I haven't. I've been in the current one for about 5 or 6 years, but it's definitely been made. It's a stereotypical academic's office with piles of paper, and until recently there were fossils all over the floor till I got...
That sounds terrible.
Yeah, got myself a cupboard to make stuff tidy, but it's...
So much for not wanting an office job.
But the Zoology Department's looking amazing now, which takes us right back to extinct duck, because, of course, Pauline... Barry, isn't it?
Yep.
Pauline Barry has done the amazing mural up the side there with a selection of extinct birds. Yes, and it's really amazing. And to see that moa so big there, I don't know. Have you seen that one, Tommy? Yeah.
No, it's good. Best contribution from the Zoology Outreach Fund to that. So
yeah, no, it's a fabulous SciComm there, I think, and she's done an amazing job, and it's so big that you really see it, and then you see all the little ones around it as well. No, I love it. I
think between that, we've got Paulina's massive painting, and it got all the different species and all the extinction times, and we've got Bruce Michalski's one in the main entrance of zoology with all of the different animals that we're studying. It's kind of this really, really unique, exciting entry for zoology and putting us on the spot.
Yeah, and I suppose it also brings to mind the fragility of New Zealand's fauna as well in some way, because these are all like species that are gone forever unless, I don't know, are you one of the proponents of bring back the mammoth?
No. I think you can develop the technology to save what we've got left, but you shouldn't be assuaging human guilt by bringing things back. And it's this classic thing. It's like if you think of Dolly the sheep, they had to try hundreds of different dollies to get one, and she effectively died of old age. And you think of, okay, how many moa would you have to bring back? How many huia, how many South Island kokaka would you have to bring back? And there's this classic rule in conservation genetics. It's the 500 rule, that you ideally need a population size of at least 500, because otherwise you are going to, and sorry for any monarchists in the audience, you are going to become inbred and have all the issues of royal families, like Tutankhamun married his sister and his kids died from inbreeding, or the English royal family, or the one I love using is the Habsburgs.
The Habsburgs, that's the one that everybody goes straight to the jaw, don't they? Yeah.
So you can't.
Lisp, but
why bring one back? You need to bring 500 back.
Yeah. But I guess the argument is that if you can bring one back, you can bring 500 back.
But do you bring 500
copies
of the same thing?
You would have to. Yeah, you would have to. You would have to. I guess you would have to find the DNA from, I don't know, from a large number of fossils. So really, maybe you should be thinking about things that have gone recently extinct, where there is a large pool of fossils.
Or tissues might be frozen in a biobank. And you need your environment, so that the analogy is like Jurassic Park. You can't just bring back the dinosaurs, you need to bring back the environment. So if we think of
the plants,
Central Otago, we had lots of moa.
Sorry.
I know what the environment means.
No, I was just saying, look, I'd just like to remind everybody that the plants are the most important thing. That's what all botanists across the world do that. Especially when they've got a zoologist in the room. They're like, he's a zoologist, you can talk.
Do I need to separate you too? Like, so I mean, we might need a bucket.
Sorry, Nick, carry on.
Central Otago was unique. So Mike Pohl, who's a well-respected geologist who's living up at Mulrake, has gone through Central Otago and looked at what was the vegetation at the time of human arrival. And it's an environment we don't have an analogue for. It's dominated. It's a canopy. If you think of all of those rocky talls and hillsides, it's a canopy dominated by lancewood and kowhai.
Yeah.
And we just don't have that at all.
Yeah. And I mean, really, when we're thinking about bringing back, even theoretically bringing back extinct things, we should really be thinking about bringing back plants first, because it's actually way easier to propagate plants and you're more likely to get diversity of seeds, right, than you ever are to get diversity of entire individuals and tissues from individuals.
You can cultivate seeds thousands of years old.
Yeah, and did you see that one with the flowering? It was a selenia. What was it? Selene.
Yeah, from the permafrost.
Yeah, from the like a squirrel ate the plant just before it died, and then it died in a bog, right? So it went down into the bog. So it just sat there, and the seeds just sat in the gut of the squirrel for, I can't remember what it was 10,000, 40,000 years, something.
Just frozen solid.
Just frozen solid. And then, of course, everything's warming up. The permafrost is melting, and they're finding all these masses, because they're getting masses of mammoth.
Heaps and heaps of
bodies
mammoth.
And things coming out of the permafrost.
Yeah.
And I guess someone found this tiny little squirrel and thought, hey, what's in the gut of this squirrel? I mean, that's scientists for you. You find, you're tromping around the permafrost, you find a squirrel, you think, hey, what's in the gut of this squirrel? There's seeds.
I could say it sounds like a 5-year-old to me, but that would be very
seeds
rude.
In the gut. Let's see. Well, I mean, it's the obvious thing, isn't it? Let's see it. Plant them. Let's see if they grow.
Then you'd know what the conditions, what the plants were like at the time, what they were eating.
Yeah.
We go around rock shelters, and if you go in Central Otago and parts of New Zealand, if you find a north-facing rock shelter, any rock shelter that a sheep sleeps in, and you dig down through the compacted layer, which is
we're not encouraging people to do this, by the way. Just explaining
school holiday trip, but
you dig down through the compact layer, which is all solidified from sheep pee and everything, you get to the pre-human layer, and you're finding twigs and leaves and moa nests and moa feathers and fossilized moa poo, and you can do the DNA on that and look at the plant seeds and pollen. You can work out the plants it ate, what moa went to the toilet. You can work out what parasites it had, and it's all there.
So this DNA's really kind of opened up a whole new, massively fascinating area of science that can take us backwards as far as it can take us forward. So
pretty much. So New Zealand, we can go back 60,000 years. The record's Koana Swamp in Southland, where we've got DNA from 50, 60,000-year-old moa, but it's really personified by two phrases from different knowledge systems. So you've got geology, like the past is the key to the present and future. And in Maori, it's kia whakatamuri te haere whakamua. I walk backwards into the future with my eyes fixed on the past, which I find amazing. Two totally separate knowledge systems with almost the same phrase. So we can reconstruct in effectively like real time. We're time travelers, time lords effectively. How these animals adapted.
That's why botanists
he beat me to the Doctor Who reference, because there was a program in the 70s where they planted a seed and it took over the world. But
sorry, carry on then, Nick.
So we can reconstruct in real time what these animals were doing and how they were responding to our dynamic geological climatic human history, but then also what lessons can we take from that moving forward, and how do we use that for kaitiakitanga, conservation management by DOC, NGOs and tangata whenua, but also for Mahinga Kai as well.
Yeah, and that whole, like, what you're eating and where you're getting it from and how that's changed over time with various species going extinct. Because I think with birds, there's about 30% of the bird species, correct me when I get this
30 to
right.
50, it's really high.
Yeah, I think it was 30% went extinct within Polynesian
within
the
a couple
first
hundred
humans,
years,
and then the next 30% went extinct with European and all of the add-ons
Yeah.
that Europeans brought, the stoats and the weasels and the cats and the... I mean, cats alone are responsible for how many? 3 or 4? At least
3 or 4
species, entire species, just cats responsible for... I mean, the Stevens Island wren is the famous one. But
that's one we're working on, and it's just
absolutely crazy. Yeah, no, just cats. Just cats. And then, of course, there's the combination of cats and dogs and weasels and stoats and ferrets and possums and
then we've got
mice.
Hedgehogs.
And
Hedgehogs are up in the alpine zone now, which is just...
Yeah.
amazing.
That's one of the worst things about climate change is that we've had for such a long time, or for a couple of hundred years, these little alpine refugia, basically, where it's been too cold for these predators coming from Europe and Eurasia. And now with climate change and the warming, and that slowly going up, but there's nowhere for those refuges to move further up. They're at the top of the mountain already. You can't go higher than that. And if you don't get those heavy snows in winter, the heavy cold winters to push everything back down again. And of course, I mean, the classic example is the takahe, right? Because they're not a mountain species, but their little refuge was there in the Murchison Mountains, quite high in that basin, because it was... lacking in the predators, but they should be all over the whole of New Zealand.
And that's what some of the research my PhD student Alex Very did with takahe, is you look at the fossil record and they are all throughout the North Island, South Island. They're happy anywhere. Their habitats, there's very dynamic edge habitats. So it's like where you've got forests and river flats and rivers and that. Their ideal habitat is not tussocklins up in refuges, and there is a lot of genetic variation around when humans first arrive, and within 100 years you've literally gone from the genetic variation of Dunedin to the genetic variation of the Habsburgs. You've gone from lots of lineages to one, and they've just refuged in Takahe Valley. And then part of the problem with that with conservation management going forward is everything that is guided conservation of takahe is their habitat is tussock. So if we want to translocate them to another area, we need to put them in tussock. And when we go, well, no, they're not a tussock bird. And that explains why, say, the translocation to the Goulin Downs and Heafy Track failed.
Right. It's really counterintuitive, but it reminds me of that story of the bombers in World War II, and they had all the bombers, and they'd go out and they'd get shot to bits, and a whole lot of them would fall out of the sky and blow up, whatever, and then some of them would come back. And the ones that came back, they were all shot up. And so they'd look at where they were shot up, and they'd try and make the bits that were all shot up actually stronger, because they're like, oh, these bits are all shot up. And it's completely wrong. Like, it seems totally... right, but actually the bits that are all shot up and the plane still survives and get back to base means that you can shoot those bits up and the plane still gets back. It's the other bits that you actually need to make strongest. And that's, I guess, a little bit similar to the takahe. Like, actually, it's the other places where they aren't still where they need to...
You need all of that temporal time travel information to make the informed decision.
And I guess that's, since takahe were rediscovered, that's actually longer now than we've had those DNA tools to actually get that story. So it's kind of this weird kind of shifting of conservation and conservation management. Yeah,
and to give an idea, it's like there were takahe in northwest South Island at the height of the last glacial maximum. I think the Ice Age movies we're talking about 10,000 to 30,000 years ago. But all of those lineages went extinct.
Right.
The takahe there didn't go, we're going to track the changes in the distribution of our optimal preferred habitat. No, the habitat changed, those ones went extinct, and it was the rest of the ones across the South Island of New Zealand survived. So it's like, it's this, you've got the distribution and the ancient DNA going, this area really isn't good for them, so we have to think twice about putting them back in there.
So what's the answer? Is the answer really just to, make the habitat around where they are now and bigger and more intact, and hope that genetic diversity will re-eventuate in the population, and they'll sort of slowly, the ones that can cope with that lowland habitat will go, and eventually they'll spread back out, rather than doing these massive jumps of translocations, but try and get a sort of gradual growth of the population down.
They're really adaptable. Like you can translocate takahe to Mana Island or Tiritiri, and they do fine. So I think you've got that as actually established these corridors, these trapping networks. Think of ecosystem scale conservation, so that they can move and not get munched. The other thing is use the ancient DNA, use the fossil distribution to go, well, where did they occur? Where is optimal pre-human take habitat? And then map onto that, okay, where's the trapping, where's the ecosystem scale conservation, and go, right, where can we put them? Because then they might do a lot better.
Yeah. And I guess that the key there is actually thinking also about placing your trapping resources in the right places for not just the takahi, but for the maximum number of species that you can get a good ecosystem. Because it all goes back to plants and the ecosystem. And
I always bring back to the soil myself. But.
Well, there's arguments either way. Hey,
but let's talk about extinct ducks.
Let's talk about this extinct duck. Yes. So it's a merganser.
Yep.
Right? And I'm saying that right, aren't I?
Yeah,
merganser.
no, that's right.
It's
Merganser.
a strange word.
It sounds like a plant, actually, but yeah. Sorry.
Just because it's strange. Now, I actually read this conversation. Sorry, I'm getting my tongue tied. I knew I was going to say that wrong. And I said it to myself, it's the conversation, not the conservation. Anyway, it's like the spin-off.
Yeah.
But it's the Australian version. But it does have quite a few articles from New Zealand in it now, doesn't it? It's great. And I think it's all free, isn't it?
It's all free. We've got our own New Zealand outfit that's headed by Veronica Maduna, who used to be with Our Changing World. We don't have to deal with Australian defamation lawyers anymore when you're writing stuff, which is quite nice.
Not that you definitely go out to defame people. It just
no. There was when I was helping lead the fight to save Foldamar, I was writing a conversation piece, and I may have tried to put in a reference of a mining company trying to go against the tide of public opinion, and it may have similarities to the Titanic.
Right. We should get Daphne on to talk about Foldamar.
Yeah.
We'll do that.
Yeah, and it was very much
follow-up.
when the conversation was part of Australia, we didn't have a New Zealand outfit. It was like, much as we'd like to keep that, no, we can't put that there.
Oh, right, okay. Anyway, so the conversation, and that's all free, so we'll put the link to that in our episode description, and the link to the paper that it's based on, or at least one of the papers.
Access.
That's all open access as well. So that's the Zoological Journal of the Linnaean Society, and that's got all the technical details. But the conversation's really nice because it kind of is just that, bottles everything down to what's the actual story here, why is this interesting? And it's interesting, I guess, because it's a duck species. It's two duck species, right?
Yeah.
Both mergansers.
Yeah.
That are in New Zealand, but both extinct.
Yeah.
And then there's only one other species in the southern hemisphere, in Brazil of all places. And then there's heaps of them in the northern hemisphere. So right across Europe, Eurasia, not South America, North America.
Yeah, so you've got this wider tribe of ducks, group of ducks called the Mergini, and so that's got your famously extinct Labrador duck. It's got eiders, it's got smews.
Why is the Labrador duck famously extinct?
It's a very well-known duck in the 1800s that was hunted and predated rapidly into extinction.
By Labradors?
No, it's from Labrador in North America.
Oh, from the place.
Yeah,
right.
from the place.
Right, yep. Which is why Labradors are called Labradors as well, right? So it could have been. All right,
so you've got this widespread northern hemisphere group of all of these ducks, and the mergansers are part of this group.
Right, and the eider duck is the one that they make eider downs from, isn't it? Yeah, but they're not extinct.
They're not extinct. Yeah. But in the southern hemisphere, there's no fossil records of this Mergini at all. No fossil records of mergansers, and you've literally got the critically endangered Brazilian merganser, which is down to about 250 individuals in parts of Uruguay, Brazil, and Peru, and Argentina. And then you've got the recently extinct mergansers in the New Zealand region. So there are subfossil bones throughout the North Island, South Island, Rakiura, Stewart, and Rikohu Chathams. And famously, the living Auckland Island merganser, which is part of this New Zealand radiation, was discovered in the 1840s.
Why is that famous?
This one was famous because we didn't really know about the subfossil bones in the New Zealand region then, and the scientists in the 1800s went, well, this is a Merganser. Why is there a Merganser here? They're a Northern Hemisphere group.
Right, because there was none here, and then they went there, and they were right.
So it was discovered in the 1840s on the Auckland Islands, and then due to predation from pigs and cats, but also collecting for the museum trade.
So it managed to last right into the Victorian, post-European times, and then those Victorians, the end of the 1800s, 1840 through to. Well, just the whole of those 1800s, they just were crazy about skulls and bones and feathers and decoration, and the more exotic, the better.
Yeah. And that's why they were so sought after. It's like you have a very rare bird that shouldn't be there, or why is it there? It's from far-flung island. We need to collect it. And much like the
hui is another example.
The hui, the great hawk, the last two individuals were killed for the museum trade, as the last two individuals were killed in 1902 of the Merganser for the museum trade. And then it was gone.
And then it's gone. I mean, I guess you could say if there's only two left, is it going extinct anyway?
It's functionally extinct anyway.
But then you've got the black robin.
Yeah, that got down to 5 individuals, one old blue, which was fertile, one fertile male, the other 4 weren't, and they're completely inbred. They're more close related to each other, individuals are to each other than brothers and sisters. Yet it's doing fine.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it'll because things are constantly mutating, right?
Yeah.
So that, over time, that genetic diversity must accrue again. Over a long time.
Over a long time, if we can get them alive, it will do. But at the same time, the massive population and genetic bottleneck, that genetic variation of Dunedin to a Habsburg, you can have the accumulation of really bad mutations like the Habsburg jaw and the infertility, but you can also, at the flip side, have these really big bottlenecks and all of the bad mutations get purged. And that's what we think happened with the black robin.
Right. Because they just...
How does...
Like all those individuals that had Habsburg chins... In the black robins, they just died. They couldn't cope with it. So you only get the most fit individuals that are still there, because it's such a tough way to live that everything dies. That's like slightly no good.
Yeah.
So my slightly sore back, I'm dead already.
So we're going to need another bucket and a mop, I think.
Hey Nick, just going back there to what you were talking about before, what's the difference between subfossils and fossils?
So fossil is technically anything that's withstood the natural processes of degradation. And so subfossil you can think of as...
What does that mean? That means it's weathered.
It's withstood weathering, it's withstood rotting and everything. So you can think of subfossils like it hasn't been completely replaced by minerals.
Right.
Okay.
So it's still a bone, but the bone may be 10, 20, 100,000 years old, because bones are fairly solid.
So when you're talking about ancient DNA, you can't actually get ancient DNA from fossils.
From mineralised fossils where all the bones being replaced by minerals. No,
because there's no DNA left.
No,
it's all
you can
mineral,
see fossilised DNA. You can see fossilised chromosomes and fossilised DNA
that's pretty
strands
cool.
if the preservation is really good, but you can't actually get the genetic code out.
Right.
But
So when we're talking about ancient DNA, we're not actually talking about fossils. We're talking about subfossils.
we're talking about subfossils.
Just.
Yeah.
Because if it was a fossil, there would be no DNA left by definition.
Yeah. So
I think most people think ancient DNA is about fossils, right?
Oh, it's Jurassic Park.
Well, no, that's Amber. I've
never watched.
Have you never watched Jurassic Park?
Oh, God, no.
God.
I got to see it in 3D on an IMAX screen at a paleontology conference in Melbourne last year. It was great.
There would be.
But the limit of ancient DNA is about 2.5 million years old, and that's kind of where we're at. So
So when you're talking 2.5 million years, there's a long time for something to not be a fossil, right?
Yeah.
So why are those ones not fossils?
It's Siberia, it's permafrost.
It's permafrost.
It's mammoths, it's just frozen ground. So if we think of 2.5 million years ago, if we go back a little bit further, 5 million years ago, you're coming out of the Miocene, you've had a tropical climate, you're becoming really quite cool, you're going into the Pliocene, which is about 5 to 2.5 million years ago. The climate's starting to open up, forests contract, and at 2.5 million years ago is when your ice ages hit.
Right.
And if you're in Siberia and you're a mammoth that's died and
you fall in a bog.
you freeze, and Siberia is still freezing cold in summer, and you just are snap frozen for 2.5 million years. And if you're buried really, really deep...
And of course you get buried deeper over time, right?
Deeper over time.
You get more bog on top of you, and
yep.
the bones sink down through the layers.
And it might be in summer only the top part defrosts.
So does that mean that we know a lot more about certain geographical areas
Yep.
because they preserve things better?
Certain time periods, certain geographical areas. So like in New Zealand, we have a really rich subfossil record from just after human arrival, with the archaeological record coming in right back to about 50 to 60,000 years, and then it starts getting patchy. You get a couple 100,000 years, then you get about 1 million years, and then you might get a blip here or a blip there.
And so what's that? Is that cold? I mean, where are those places in New Zealand? Are they cold places or are they dry places? Or?
Subfossil record will be sand dunes, moa swamps, river gravels, lots of cave systems.
Is an odd one, isn't it? Because isn't that always shifting there? So
Always shifting, but if you've got
I guess if it was
rich in calcium, it's going to preserve the bone.
Ah, right. Okay.
And when you start getting older in time,
I guess the river might have changed completely, and then that bit's left, and then the river comes back and then disturbs it, and it comes back up to the top again. Because in New Zealand we've got all those braided rivers, haven't we?
Yeah.
So they're shifting across
Yeah.
huge valley floors, and it might have been 100,000 years since it was right over on that side, and then it's sort of shifted away, and that bit's just gone down.
and you're going to have little oxbows and
yeah,
billabongs and
that's Australian. We don't have billabongs here. What are you talking about there?
and your
oxbow,
your older ones are more solid encased in rock, or St. Bathans that we're working with Te Papa out in central Otago that's 10 to 20 million years old. That's all coming out of sand-rich clays that are...
So what's the clay is keeping the oxygen from decomposing the...
Yeah, decomposing the bones.
Right.
Yeah, and so they've been buried and uplifted, and you'll be the rivers and creeks around there will just expose cross sections, and you'll be digging into the banks of the creek. But it might be if this is the surface.
That's how the moa prints came up, wasn't it? Yeah.
This will be the surface, and you might be digging. So it's like about 2 meters above the floor, and you might be digging down at floor level, and so it's all preserved in there.
Right. And that, of course, gives you the stratigraphy as well,
Yeah.
so you get some time information, because obviously when everything's layered in time, like things, I mean, that's a basic archaeological rule, right? Things don't get layered. Newer things are always above older things, unless someone's dug a hole.
Yeah.
Oh, true. How do you know they're there in the first place? Like, what sends you thinking there's stuff there?
So if we scouring papers past, old geological records, I was just up the Cobb Valley in Golden Bay for a week with the kids taking on their first overnight tramp, and we're going exploring, and so you stick your head. It's like, there's a quarry on a map, let's go have a look at a quarry, and then you stick your head down a cave. It's like, there could be something down there. So lots of exploring and not growing up. But if you're walking...
But you're looking for places.
You recognise.
So you're looking for an environment. You're looking for the place that looks like a likely place that something could have died here 100,000 years ago and not completely decomposed in the meantime.
Yeah, exactly. And you might be looking for eroding bones. So we'll walk up erosion gullies, where there was a fossil digs we did in Australia up at St. Bathans or anywhere, or sand dunes.
We went on one of those when I was in Townsville. We drove all the way out into the desert to, I think it's called Richmond.
Richmond, really good place. Chronosaurus Corner in Richmond.
And there's like it's a really cool museum.
Oh, it's great.
Because it's actually got a little, it's got a little lab in the middle of it, and you can watch the people. And it's really cool. And you can go, there's places that you can go out and just dig for things. But I don't know what we were thinking. We didn't have any proper digging type utensils with us. Like, we ended up with, I think we had a plastic spoon or something. We were digging away trying to find. And we found one little thing about that big.
Well, to me, you come out.
I'm showing a very small thing here when I say that big.
There's been some amazing finds in those public pits that they've been digging, like fossilised fish and ichthyosaurs. My wife did her PhD on the extinct ichthyosaurs in Australia, so we went all around Chronosaurus.
Sorry, the extinct?
Ichthyosaurs, fish lizards.
fish lizards.
in Australia. So went to
Typical Australians.
Kronosaurus Corner and the Australian Age of Dinosaurs and Winton and
some really cool stuff. But there's
Yeah.
even cooler stuff in New Zealand.
there is.
So I just want to get back to these ducks, these mergansers,
Yeah.
because I read in your paper that they're fish-eating ducks with a
Yep.
serrated bill. Is that unusual for a duck?
It is. So if you think of birds evolved from dinosaurs, and dinosaurs had teeth, and then birds lost all their teeth and developed the bill. And then if you think of birds with serrated bills, they're not true teeth. The famous ones you think of are the false-toothed pelicans, the pseudodontonids, which were the size of an albatross, and they've got...
I think Nick has a different idea of what famous is.
I mean, sorry, paleo nerd.
No, carry on.
These giant false-toothed pelicans the size of a royal albatross are really big serrations, probably about 10 centimetres
Wow.
in length.
No wonder they're famous.
Yeah, so they really look like teeth.
They
along
really
their
look like
bit.
teeth. And with the mergansers, they've got that serrated bill. So they live in rivers, around, we think around lakes, seasonally around the coast, much like Walter Buller in the 1800s observed blue ducks around the coast and estuaries in high numbers, and they would have been fish eating. So you need those serrations to catch slippery, slimy fish.
Right, okay. Because, of course, there are lots of mergansers
Yeah.
in the northern hemisphere,
Yep.
right? So are they just fish-eating serrated bills as well?
Yeah, they're all fish eating serrated bills, some with funky hairdos.
I'm going to go home and Google some of these, I think.
But we have no idea when they got to New Zealand region
And why are they
And
here
how?
and not in
Yeah.
Australia?
and why are they not in Australia.
Or
and,
South America, for that matter. I mean, Brazil.
Brazil.
Yep. And where
guess
did they
that-
come from? So was it two independent dispersal events from the Northern Hemisphere, one to New Zealand, one to Brazil? Did it come to New Zealand first and then go to Brazil? Did it go to Brazil and then come to New Zealand? And where did they come from? So you kind of think of, if we go back to the fantastic work Michelle Knaps and my PhD student Pascal Lubber was doing, of the majority of our birds, most people think come from Australia. And we've got this quintessentially weird bird going, where did it come from?
Yeah, this whole Australia thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
Dr.
So-
Knapp was a bit over in the Australian things coming from there as well. But he did admit that not everything did come from
No,
Australia.
not everything did. And an increasing number didn't.
Yeah, and that kind of makes sense, right? That there would be some from Australia because it's close.
Yeah.
And some that had just been here longer.
Do
Yeah.
we know when they came?
When? So we extracted all the DNA. We sequenced the mitochondrial genome. So this is the DNA that's passed down from mother to daughter, if you think 7 daughters of Eve, and reconstructed the whakapapa. And
So you can only do that on female.
and you can do it female or male. So males will inherit the mitochondrial DNA from their mum, but they won't pass it on. So in the process of fertilization, all the mitochondria, which contain the mitochondrial DNA in sperm, are all in the tail.
Right.
And then when the sperm fuses
cool.
with the egg, it drops the tail.
Fell off.
Right.
Yeah.
And then so the nuclear DNA, the complete genetic blueprint, is in the head of the sperm, and the mitochondria individuals get from the egg.
So it's the opposite of the classic European surnaming.
Yep. Pretty much.
She's rolling her eyes at
But in the Jewish tradition, you always name them after the mother because you know for certain who the mother is.
Yeah, sorry.
So we think they arrived around about at least 7 to 12 million years ago.
Right.
From the northern, we can't pinpoint the northern hemisphere because the species is most closely related to the common merganser is widespread across the northern hemisphere. But there were 2 independent dispersal events.
So they're not most closely related to the Brazilian merganser. That's the key thing. So they both, the Brazilian one and the New Zealand ones,
Went
came.
walkabout, and one ended up in Brazil and one ended up in the New Zealand region.
And did they go at the same time? Like, is that time period?
Very rapidly. So what you get is the about 18 million years ago, the mergansers evolve amongst all of the mergini, all of those wider northern hemisphere ducks, and then very rapidly, 7 to 12 million years ago, you just get this rapid diversification to lots of species in the northern hemisphere, and they colonise Brazil, they colonise New Zealand.
And
So what do you think might have caused that to?
They're migratory. And so you've got the northern, if you look at the living
So they just got
Mergansers,
blown off course.
we think so. So they've got winter non-breeding ranges, and they've got summer breeding ranges, and they'll just migrate. Their distributions will wax and wane. Now the trick is birds can get lost. There's a famous science writer, David Quammen, who wrote a book called The Song of the Dodo about island biogeography, so where animals and plants are and why. And he's a big fan of Wallace and not Darwin. Right. But he wrote, the chance of an animal getting from one island to another in any given year is impossible. Multiply that over geological timescale, it's inevitable.
Yeah.
And so all you need is an individual to get a lot of time, an individual get lost. And the thing is, all you need to do is get through the tropics. That's the hard bit. Once you've got through that, you can get here. And it's interesting that the Brazilian and the Merganser and the New Zealand, they aren't migratory. So the climate wasn't as harsh as the northern hemisphere. So you get here, you don't need to migrate.
Yeah,
right.
straight.
Suddenly
I'm
it's
not
like,
going
I'm not going to go anywhere, and I'm going to start diverging.
Right, yeah. So
Why is
so
the tropics? Is it because it's just hot,
hot,
steamy, nobody
no wind.
likes it?
yeah.
Yeah.
And I
No
guess,
food. The tropics, if you think of this tropical, short of the islands and the coral reefs, the tropics is actually quite barren.
yeah, people think of it as full of life.
Yeah.
But no, when I think about it.
I don't know, for a duck, maybe it's
Yeah.
hard work. But what I'm thinking is they're in New Zealand
Yep.
and they're in Brazil. How do we know they weren't in South America and just they went extinct earlier and no one has found the bones yet? Or Australia or, you know.
We don't. So if you think of most of the Victorian times now, paleontology is focused on all the northern hemisphere and it's neglected the southern hemisphere. And so,
I mean, there's more people in the northern hemisphere
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
paleogenetics, right?
And-
There's more money, there's more
Yeah.
labs, there's more.
Yeah, and so New Zealand's got a really good, well-understand fossil record, but we're discovering new things every day. It's like 5 million years ago in Taranaki, we had monk seals, which are now only known from the Caribbean and the Mediterranean.
Crazy.
And that, but there's fossil gold rushes happening in South America as the locals have been trained up. In Australia, they're now in a dinosaur gold rush. But bird bones are also fragile.
Right, because they're
And so
thin and they're.
They're
Right.
thin, they're hollow. It's not like classic thick mower bones. And so the further you go back in time, the more chances the bird bones are going to get busted up, or you're going to get a bit of something or a bit of this, but not the key bone that will tell you the relationship. So they're probably there. We just haven't found them yet.
So it might not be so crazy that there's just 2 species in New Zealand and 1 species in Brazil. It
Yeah.
might be just that we haven't
don't
yet
know.
found
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
other ones. Now, about these 2 species,
Yeah.
how do we know there's 2 species? Because this paper's only got the name of 1 species in it.
So this is kind of a two-parter. We chose the Auckland Island Merganser as the exemplar of the New Zealand radiation.
Right.
It's because we could get our stick little fingers on a toe pad from a museum skin from Canterbury Museum.
Right.
And so that kind of gives us the 7 to 9 million years arriving is like a minimum date of arrival. So
Right.
the next step is we want to look at the radiation across the entire New Zealand region. So
Right. So is this paper, this is just based on one individual?
one individual.
One individual's.
One duck.
Yeah,
One
duck.
One toe pad from one duck.
One toe pad from one duck is enough to give us all of that information. So the
Wow.
next step is to go, right, what was the genetic variation of the Mergansers on the Auckland Islands? If we
Right.
go through time, can we see them lose in variation? How did these guys...
Because you can date the ones that you've the remains that you've got from the Auckland Islands quite well.
Quite well, because we've got all the collection years. And then we
Right.
can go to the bones on mainland New Zealand and the Chathams and go, well, when did the Auckland diverge from mainland New Zealand? Do you see any difference between Rakia, Stewart Island, South Island, North Island? Was the split between the North and South Island due to the formation of Cook Strait 400,000 years ago? Or is it an older split, 5 million years ago with the Manawatu Strait when all of the Manawatu and Palms North was underwater? Sorry, Palmy listeners. Or when did the Chatham species only being described off differences in bone shape. We haven't done the DNA of it yet. So is
So
the
it might
Chathams
actually
distinct?
just be the same species.
It
just
might be the same species.
slightly-
When did it evolve? Was it one of these early evolving species on the Chathams about 3.5 million years ago when the islands came up above the sea? Or was it a really recent speciation event?
So really what we need over this also like a picture of where New Zealand was at different
Yeah.
times and what bits were up and down
Yeah.
and
Because that's still a little bit up for debate, isn't it? Which, there's this whole theory of New Zealand having sunk completely under the
No,
ocean.
we didn't.
And I think, I think that's the general consensus of people in the know, in the tea
we'll
room.
find out when we get to talk to David. Yeah.
But we know for the Chathams that the Chathams was above water at the time of the dinosaurs, and it sunk, and then the current Chathams has come back up in the past 3 to 3.5 million years.
Right. So we know that there's nothing that evolved there further back than
Yeah.
that. It might have evolved there, speciated to New
Afterwards,
Zealand,
yeah.
or it might have evolved there afterwards and then re-invaded. And I should just mention that the Auckland Islands, because I know that people get this really confused, the Auckland Islands are not anywhere near Auckland.
No, they're about 465 kilometres south of Bluff.
Yeah, so they are sub-Antarctic islands, and I had this really remarkable opportunity to go to Enderby Island with a master's
great
student,
there.
and it's
Yeah.
absolutely fantastic. And everybody was totally unimpressed because they're like, well, it's just like they were thinking it was like this tiny little island off of Auckland, and I was like, no, we didn't take a ferry. It's like really adventurous.
I think Auckland was a person.
He was. He's one of
Yeah.
those dozy
Whatever.
English generals or something. I don't know. Yes.
To me, the cool thing with this study is if you go back to the grandfather of New Zealand paleontology is a guy called Charles Fleming, who set up geological and nuclear sciences and was involved in Save Manapuri campaign and everything. And he wrote this classic paper, I've got a copy in my office, called The Biogeography of New Zealand in the 1960s that was published in Tuatara, which was the journal of the Biology Department of Vic Uni.
Right.
And purely from looking at the distribution of animals now and the fossil record, no DNA, he basically said, right, these are all the animals in New Zealand and here's where I think they came from. So you've got your archaic lineages, like the ones that have been here since Gondwana time, and you've got your cosmopolitan, your ones from Australia, ones from Antarctica, and ones from Asia, and ones from this and that. And we're now seeing with DNA that he was quite right 50, 60, 70 years later. Like we think of a lot's coming from Australia, but we're getting linkages with Mergansers from the northern hemisphere, the blue-eyed shags, the Otago shag out at Tairoa Head. Comes from South America. Our kiwi have got really close relationships with the extinct elephant bird from Madagascar. Our moa with tinamous from South America. Our adsbill, which is this giant extinct rail, the same family as takahe. It's most closely related to the Afro-Madagascan flufftails, which are tiny little birds.
Crazy.
And so you're getting all of these more worldwide links. So our bird form is a lot more cosmopolitan and diverse than Australia.
It's interesting, because we are really just a tiny little island in the middle of a big ocean. But then, if things are going past, we're the place that they stop, right?
Fly
we're
paper of the Pacific. Yeah.
No, it's quite crazy. Hey,
Yes.
these are all really cool birds, like mostly extinct that we're talking about here, right? If people wanted to go and think about these birds some more, are there... Where can they go? Like the Otago Museum that would have...
Otago Museum's got really good displays on living and extinct birds and the ones that went extinct due to Europeans and Polynesians, and really good displays of all the moa skeletons and the subfossils and the lessons we can learn. Books that are worthwhile getting is Alan Tennyson and Paul Martinson's Extinct Birds in New Zealand, which was published in 2007.
Right.
Really, really good resource as well.
Yeah, and I guess some of the birds have been have been around in kind of written history or oral history, so there'll be some information about what they actually looked like in terms of colour and plumage and stuff. But then, do we know anything about these older ones? I mean, I guess these Mergansers, they're kind of in that their latest, like there's still skins of them, so we
Yeah.
still know like what the feather pattern was, and they were kind of the
Yeah.
final nail in the coffin of the New Zealand Merganser was the Europeans.
Yeah.
And I guess what was it that drove them extinct? In the Auckland Islands, you were saying.
And
was the
Auckland
pigs.
collecting for the museum
So
trade and
collecting, yeah.
predation from pigs and cats. Yeah.
Yeah, so pigs eat ducks.
Yep.
Pigs will eat
Pigs will eat
anything.
anything.
It's crazy. Hey?
So we know how to get rid of a body.
I know it's a classic crime thing, that's like go right back to the whole forensics thing. God, look at us all sitting here going, oh, yeah, pigs. Oh my goodness.
So
Yeah,
is there a relationship with local iwi? Are we aware of?
There's a Maori name for the Merganser called Miuweka, Miuweka. I may have murdered that pronunciation. That's not necessarily the most appropriate name, but it's the most commonly used name within the New Zealand literature that's on
So when you
NZ Birds Online.
So when you say it's not necessarily the most appropriate, is that from speaking with iwi? Or?
So we know that around. So I sit on the birds. The New Zealand, the checklist of New Zealand birds, and so one of the things we've wanted to do is have a living document of all of the English names for birds and all of the Indigenous Maori names. But and that can get added to.
Right.
But when you actually have the checklist, you need to put a name.
Right.
And so we've picked the most commonly used one based in the New Zealand literature. So, for example, you could have bellbirds in New Zealand or tui have multiple different names.
Yeah.
And some iwi may go, well, we don't actually like that name, we will use our name, but we've just picked the most commonly used one.
Why do you just have to have one for a checklist? Why can't you just have multiple columns in your spreadsheet?
We do in the spreadsheet, but in the actual printed version of the checklist.
Seems like a fault with the checklist to me.
Yep. So that's why we had to we picked a common one for each, but we said, look, there's this underlying document.
Right.
It's this living document. Come to us with more names. We haven't got everything. If you think
Because it's quite common for things to have multiple names from different people. In Te Ao Māori, but also in every culture that ever existed. I think there's some people call things different things.
And then on New Zealand Birds Online, it's actually it'll have the most common name, and then it's actually got alternative names, and it'll just list all of the other ones as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
With a lot of our New Zealand birds is through colonisation, all of that Mataranga Maori has been lost. And so with the Auckland Islands, the current knowledge of people getting down there is Polynesians got down there early in the piece and then stayed there for probably maybe a season or two and left.
And possibly were nomadic as well, like using the resource seasonally, because that's very South Island Maori.
We've got, so far there's been one midden found on Enderby Island that's dating to the early period, but no other middens have been found. They're probably there, but again, preservation-wise, the Auckland Islands are acidic, peaty, not that good. Right. And then there's the Hardwick settlement in the 1800s that had Maori. When Europeans turned up, there were Maori there. But also Maori from the Chatham Islands came over with Moriori slaves at the same time, and then Hardwick got abandoned, and then people left. So there may have been oral tradition around it, may have been lost. So part of what we're actually trying to do is give back lost knowledge that can re-jog the memory and find lost Mataranga Maori, or help tangata whenua form new Mataranga.
Right. Oh, that's interesting, eh? Yeah, that's cool. Hey, thank you very much for coming along today, Nick. That's been a really interesting discussion about ancient DNA and this extinct duck. I guess we've got, I don't know, a little bit of time left. If you've got one last really quick thing that you've been dying to say and I keep interrupting you.
Not off the top of my head, but there's lots more exciting research that our lab is doing, not just with birds, but we're moving into... rather than focusing on a lot of the bigger animals, we're moving more down into what they call the if you think of Gulliver's Travels, the Lilliputian fauna, all of our neglected biodiversity, our skinks, geckos, our frogs, the tuatara, and what are the really cool stories that we can actually...
Not plants, though.
Some plants and that.
It's a zoology department.
It is true, it is.
And getting really into deep time with paleontology as well, so we can tell that whole gamut across New Zealand's geological, climatic and human history, from our giants right down to the tiny small animals that new techniques are allowing us to really delve into.
That sounds fantastic, Nick. We might get you back in another time and talk about some of these other facets of your amazing research there.
More than happy to.
That'd be awesome. Hey, thank you. And you've been listening to the OI podcast. If you particularly like this episode with Nick, you might also like the interview Where Does the New Zealand Bird Fauna Come From with Dr. Michelle or Michael Knapp, Diversity in Weta with Dr. Silla Wehe, and Spiders and Misinformation with Drs. Chrissy Painting and Leilani Walker. You can also support the production of the OI podcast by becoming a member for the price of a coffee, a reasonably expensive coffee, it must be said. It's $5. But I don't know, is that expensive for a coffee?
Why did I pay? I got charged $20 the other day. You owe me 3 cups of coffee.
I know, no, that's true. It's because we've got the special going at the moment for $5. So,
but we will accept.
We will accept all donations of whatever, because it all goes to help useful things. So there's the podcast and there's the science fair coming up as well. So we do sponsor 2 of the premier prizes for the Otago Aurora Science Fair.
Nice.
And you can do that, just go to www.otago-institute.org. And that's it for us. Ka kite. You've been listening to the OI podcast, the shout out for the arts, sciences and Mataranga Māori.
You can support this podcast by becoming a member of the OI. Check out the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences on Facebook or our website.
If you'd like to listen again to this episode or others from the series, look for the OI podcast on OAR FM's website, oar.org.nz.
Brought to you by the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences, the Otago branch of the Royal Society of New Zealand.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.